How to safely upgrade Jenkins to a new version. You've recently become the administrator for the Jenkins infrastructure within your organization. You think to yourself, okay, the previous admin was really on top of everything. I know for sure they were keeping everything up to date all the time. Do you think that was correct? You open up the controller and you find, wow, this is over 18 releases old. What do you do? That's what this video is for. I'm going to walk you through a process to help you determine the risk factors in doing the upgrade of an older Jenkins controller to the most recent LTS version without having to make any changes or touch anything on your existing controller, except for maybe one small thing. So here's our starting point for today. I have a really old Jenkins server, at least at the time of recording. This Jenkins version is 2.235.5. At the time of recording, it's roughly 18 to 19 LTS versions behind. Now, also with this controller, if you take a look back at Manage Jenkins, we're going to see that, hey, there's a new version of Jenkins available. And again, at time of recording, that version is 2.319.1. There are lots of warnings that are here. In fact, we can just keep scrolling. We can see that there are updates for plugins available. So this controller basically has been completely just ignored for roughly 18 months. So how are we going to safely figure out how we're going to upgrade this controller? Well, the first thing that I said during the introduction is there might be one change you need to make. And that change is installing the Support Core plugin. Now, if you take a look at your controller and you don't see this support icon over here on the left nav, then what you're going to do is go to Manage Jenkins, and you'll go to Manage Plugins, and under Available, you would install Support-Core. Since I already have it installed, if I go take a look at it under Installed, it's Support-Core. And if you were to scroll down here, you'll see Support Core. And the version that's installed on this specific controller is 2.70, but there are newer versions available. However, any version of Support Core should help us out with this process. So other than maybe having to install Support Core, how are we going to do this? How are we trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? How do I even come up with a plan to upgrade this controller? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a support bundle, which we'll show in just a moment, and we're going to spin up a Jenkins controller using Docker based on a Dockerfile that lives within the support bundle. Let's take a look at that real quick. I'm going to go back to Jenkins. I'm going to click on Support. And I'm not going to make any changes to the default settings here. So I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm going to click on Generate Bundle. And what will happen is a zip file will be created and will be automatically downloaded to wherever I tell it to go. In my case, I know where it's going, so I'm just going to click on OK. Now I've extracted the support bundle, and I've got it opened up here in VS Code. Now, if you've never looked inside of a support bundle before, I've done another video, in fact, a couple of videos around those bundles. If you look down in the description, you'll see the links to those videos. But what I'm going to look at specifically today is under the Docker folder. And if I click on Dockerfile, what I'm going to see is a from line using Jenkins and then whatever the version is that I'm currently running. So when we ran the support bundle, it generated this Dockerfile for us. Now, the other thing that it did is it generated download links for every one of the plugins that we have installed currently on our controller with the specific versions of those plugins. So in the case of, I'll just pick one out here, Role Strategy, it's specifically using version 3.0 of that plugin. And of S3, it's specifically using 0.11.5. So what I'm going to be able to do is take this Dockerfile and create an image that has the version of Jenkins that I'm running plus the versions of all the plugins that are currently installed. Now, what I won't have are the definitions of the jobs or any of the other configurations, but that's okay. I'm not actually doing the upgrade to the controller. I'm just trying to determine, okay, what are all the steps that I'm needing to do in order to mitigate any kind of risk while I'm upgrading my real controller. So let's think about this for just a moment. When we're planning the upgrade, we need to go ahead and capture some information. One of the first pieces of information we need to capture is what version are we going to be upgrading from? In this case, it's 2.235.5. Now, another piece of information that we need, especially at the time of recording, is understanding what version of Java is actually running this controller. If we take a look at this controller and go down to System Information, and if I go down to Java Runtime Version, I'm going to see that we're running 180.292. So I'd make a note of that. So I've got 2.235.5 and I've got 180.292. Again, those are off to the side. So with those pieces of information, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the Jenkins site, jenkins.io. I'm going to click on Download, which depending on how wide your browser is, it could be in a hamburger, but you're just looking for download. But I'm not looking at the changelog. What I want to look at is the upgrade guide. Because with the upgrade guide, we're going to be able to determine each of the things that we need to be aware of as we're upgrading from, in our case, 2.235.5 to the latest LTS, which is 2.319.1. So if we go ahead and scroll down until we get down to 2.35.5, okay, so that's where we're coming from. So that's fine. So that means the next one that we're going to be upgrading to is 2.49.1. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk our way up through each of these, albeit a little bit quickly. But if you're moving from certain versions, this is the path that you are going to want to take. You're going to need to understand what changed between each of the LTS versions to make sure that you're not being impacted. So let's start at 2.49.1. We can see here that the Microsoft.NET Framework 2.0 support was removed. That's great because I'm not using any Windows, so that's not a big deal. There's some upgrade guidelines. View job status filter, that might affect me, so I'd write that down off to the side. If I'm using configuration as code, I can see that the configuration used to be this. Now the new configuration is this. So again, if I'm using config as code, I would make changes as necessary. Alternate URLs removed from inbound agents. Okay, that could be affecting me as well. So that's all of 2.49.1. Let's take a look at 2.49.2. No notable changes requiring upgrade notes. Same thing with 2.49.3. So that means the only material changes in the 2.49 line are in the .1. All right, let's go back and let's move up to the next one, which is 2.63. We'll start at .1. And I recommend that you start at the .1 and work your way through the rest of the LTS versions. What we'll see here, the very first thing is the SSHD key exchange and MAC algorithms. That change, it's like, okay, if I'm using that, that might be important. If I scroll up to the .2, what I'm going to see as I'm scrolling through, I'm seeing lots of security fixes. So there must have been a security release that was related to the .2. Again, it is multiple security fixes with potential side effects. So this is where I would look at it a lot closer and figure out what's going on. If I take a look at .3, no big deal, no notable changes. And then I take a look up at .4. There was a Docker image update. And the labels changed from 4-LTS and 4 and that to use, now we're using 8.282. If you think back to what I'm currently running, I am running 292. So I'm actually running a version of Java that's even more current than what is included in 263.4. So I'd make a mental note of that. But also, in this case, it moved from Debian 9 to Debian 10, which meant an update from 242 to then 282. So understanding all the changes that happened. But also, there were some packages that were removed. So it's like, okay, do any of these matter to me? Probably not. And again, we're not going to be running a Docker image. All we're trying to do is upgrade in place our existing Jenkins controller. But I'm just gathering information. I'm making notes. It's like, okay, so Docker was using Debian 9, now it's using Debian 10. It moved from 242 to 282. I've made all these notes. I'm not using any of these, so I can ignore those. Python, that might affect me a little bit, but on my controller, maybe not. So we've checked out everything on 263 line. Again, stick with me here. Let's go take a look at 277.1. Now the 277 LTS had 4 big things in it. It had the configuration form modernization, also known as table to divs. There were also changes to Installation Wizard. Okay, I might make a note of that. If in case something starts up and I see it weird, I'm okay with that. There was a Spring Security upgrade, meaning that a CG Security is no longer in, and now we're using Spring Security. Okay, the Xtreme update, which was actually the Xtreme unfork. Okay, and there was an ASM update. I'm starting to see patterns here. It's like I'm writing all these things down. Okay, do any of these things affect me? Am I still using CVS plugin? Probably not, so not a big deal. Old passwords not supported. So I'm working through each of these items, making notes as I go along. Just making big notes and figuring out where I'm at. I take a look at .2. There were some security changes there. Okay, security changes. I noticed that this is something that was related to a CSRF protection. Was I doing things bad in my controller to where I had CSRF turned off? Now I've got to make these notes. Nothing in .3 or .4. That's fine. Okay, so it was the .1 and maybe the .2. Okay, let's take a look at only three more actually. 289.1. There were new icons. So if you're using the Greenballs plugin, it no longer works. So if Greenballs was an important plugin to you, okay, that's not going to be there anymore. It stopped bundling Ant and JavaDoc, okay, probably not a big deal. SSHD module. Remember a couple of pages ago, we saw SSHD had changed a little bit. Well, now it's being unbundled. So does this affect me at all? Not sure yet. We take a look at .2. There was a security fix. Okay, that's fine. We'll take a look at that. .3, nothing major. Okay, that's good. Again, I'm writing all these things down as I'm going. 303.1. The default Docker images now use Java 11. Now stop. Think about this for a moment. Our current controller uses Java 8. That means I want to use the Docker image that once I actually get to 319.1, that is still using Java 8. I don't want to use Java 11, which is what's happening in 303.1. Fortunately, there are still JDK 8 images that are available to me to be used. So make a mental note. I've got to pull in the JDK 8 version of it. Obsolete Docker images and tags. I don't care about that. Multi-arc, that's great. Oh, in case I'm running on ARM, now I've got an image that I might be able to use. Plugins that don't support Java 11. Okay, if you're moving to Java 11 to run the controller and your agents, then you might have some plugins here that just don't work anymore. Again, thinking Java 11. Now I'm moving through because the recommendation to run Jenkins is Java 11. Wait. That controller I have running is running on CentOS. But now there's a new dependency that I need to add to that controller in order to even do my yum update to install Jenkins, or to rather upgrade Jenkins. I would have to add in EPEL release because of the changes for Daemonize. Okay, I'm running CentOS, so I need this. If I was running Ubuntu, I wouldn't care because that's already there. We also had another Debian upgrade, and we also had Commons Digester removed from core. Did I have any plugins that I'm using here that are potentially going to have a problem? Don't know. But I'm making notes, making notes, making notes. JEP 200 workaround, all these other things that are happening. This was 303.1. If I take a look at 2, okay, security fix there, not a big deal. We take a look at 303.3, and this is all security related as well. So I'd make notes of, okay, security for 303.3. Finally, we're back to where we're going to be going, which is 319.1. And in 319.1, there was a change for the built-in node name, which used to be named master, and now it's called built-in. We'll look and see how that migration occurs once we actually do our test. So there's a process that we will follow for migration. We need to know that. There's some known incompatible plugins that are related to this change. Got to keep these things in mind as you're going through. But that's it for 319.1. Pretty straightforward. There were also a couple of classes removed too. So again, we started our 235.5, went one beyond that, which in this case was 249.1, and we walked our way through every one of the LTS versions. Now, if instead you are running the weekly release, you don't have this upgrade guide to follow. There are not upgrade guides from weekly to weekly to weekly. So number one, you really should be running LTS and not weeklies for your production workloads. If you're testing out weeklies, great, thank you. But in running production workloads, you probably should be using LTS because now you will be able to track what the changes are between each one, and you can apply the upgrade notes as necessary. So now that we've gone through all that, long explanation, but I wanted you to see the process to follow to make sure that you understand what's going to be going on. What we want to do is we want to take our Dockerfile, which is right over here, and we want to create an image that is for this Dockerfile. So I'm going to bring over a shell where I have just Linux set up on it. It's CentOS, doesn't really matter because we're running Docker. And I'm going to create a new Dockerfile, and I'm going to copy everything that is in this Dockerfile over to here. Okay, so now everything is loaded up and ready to go for building this Dockerfile. But prior to doing anything else, I want to go ahead and clean up all the volumes, anything that might be lying around. So we'll go ahead and force a clean. There was nothing there, so that's good. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and do a docker build -t, and I'm going to name it Jenkins-existing and do a dot. So I'm in the same directory as where my Dockerfile is. And we can see here that the manifest for Jenkins 2.35.5 is not found. So what that's telling me is that definition for that image is actually incorrect. So we need to go over to Docker Hub, and I'm going to go over to Docker Hub.docker, and I'm going to search for Jenkins. So in searching for Jenkins, we find the official image, but this is actually deprecated. So follow me here for just a second. There's Jenkins, and then it says the deprecation notice is there in favor of Jenkins/Jenkins LTS. So let's go ahead and click on this. And what you're going to see is Jenkins/Jenkins. In fact, this was just updated an hour ago. But what I want to do is I want to find the specific tag for 2.235.5. So I'm going to click on tags, and I'm going to filter tags for 2.235.5. If we take a look at it, there's some for CentOS 7 and CentOS and JDK 11. I don't care about any of those. All I really want is just 235.5. And we can see here at the very bottom, it's a Linux AMD, so I can't run it on an ARM-based system. So it's just, okay, if I was on ARM, I would need to go find an AMD-based machine. And this is what I want to use. Now, if I take a look at this, I can see that this is 98D3. That 98D3 also maps back to this 98D3 right here for 235.5-LTS. Don't really need that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and modify my Dockerfile just to include Jenkins/Jenkins, insert Jenkins/Jenkins. Okay, so we've made that change. Let's see if the build works this time. And let's see what happens once the download is complete. Now, we can see here as we're going through that it's complaining about an SSL certificate because it's using curl and is trying to download those plugins. Well, what this is telling me here is that if I scroll back up to the failure point, I can see here that the certificate has expired. If we think back to when this image was created, the root certificate around the update center probably has expired. So the way I'm going to get around this is I'm going to put in a -k, as it sort of tells me to do here, which is the -k or -- insecure, or I would try to import the certificate. But since this is not for a real runtime, and this is just for me testing to assess my risk in doing an upgrade, I'm okay with the -k. So I'm going to go back to VI Dockerfile, and I'm going to change curl to I'm going to do curl, and I'm going to do insert -k, and leave a space there. Let's go ahead and clear this, and let's do our build for the image. However, before I do that, I want to go ahead and clear out the system again. I'm going to say docker system prune, get everything cleaned up, so I'm starting fresh. And let's do this one more time. Now I'm going to say docker build. Everything's ready to go. Let's try it out. And as we're watching this go, we can see that the plugins are actually now being downloaded and put in the right place. It will take a few moments, maybe even a few minutes, depending on how many plugins that you already had installed in your controller. So again, the process. We take a look at our existing controller. We find out what version we're running. We find out what version of Java is being used to run that controller. We go through our upgrade notes from the version that we're currently running to the version that we want to go to. We're creating this container image that should look almost like a twin of our existing running controller. And then once this is complete, then we're going to spin up this image just to see what we can do with it. Okay, so the image has been built. So there's our Jenkins existing, which is the one we just built. Then we can see that 235.5 is actually 16 months old. So my number of 18 to 19 months, okay, maybe a little high, but in the ballpark. So now what we want to do is we want to start that image. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to go and grab my startup line here, and then I will take you through it. So we take this, I'm going to paste it in. So we're going to say Docker run. We're going to go ahead and expose 8080 as well as 50,000, even though we're not going to be using 50,000. We're creating a volume. And this is the key part here. We're creating this Jenkins home volume that's mapping to var Jenkins _ home, which inside of the container is Jenkins home. But we have this Docker volume here. This part is key. Don't forget this part. You'll see why in a few moments. We're also saying an environment variable for Java ops to skip the installation wizard. We don't need that to be run because we already have all of our plugins downloaded. They're in the right position. So when this container starts, everything should already be in place and ready for us to start using. And then we just start up the image that we just built. So let's go ahead and start this up. Now, as we start this, the log that we're going to see is the console log from our controller. So we'll watch each of these as it goes through. So we're extracting from the war file. Again, there's a war file inside that container. Then as it starts up, we can see that it is 235.5. And it's going through and it's going to be extracting each of those plugins. So let's fast forward through this until we can get to logging into the controller. Okay, now we're up fully and running. Or fully up and running, depending on how you want to think about it. So let's go over to a tab. And my machine name in this case is Agent1. Yes, I'm reusing an agent machine for this. That's really not an agent, but it's the name of the machine. Now you'll notice here that we're still running 235.5. I didn't have to log in because I don't have any configurations here. So it's just starting up with no authentication, authorization, no nothing. There's no jobs, there's no big configurations, but what I do have is the correct version of the Jenkins controller and all of the plugins that were installed on the other Jenkins controller. So if I take a look at Manage Jenkins, this is going to look very similar to our real-life Jenkins controller, with a few minor exceptions. We can still see here the blue bar at the top. We have some root URL is empty. It's unsecure, which we would expect. But then we have all the warnings. Again, that looks almost line for line exactly. In fact, it is line for line exactly the same. And then we're into the actual part of our Manage Jenkins page. So do another quick recap. We've done a lot of analysis. We figured out what version of the controller that we're currently running, the Java version that's running that controller. We've gone through our upgrade notes. We've created an image that looks almost exactly like our controller. It is exactly like it from a version of the controller and all of the plugins installed. It may not be the same version of Java, and that's okay for the moment, because we're not trying to figure out is everything running from a job perspective. We're just trying to see what happens when we do the upgrades. So let's go back over here to the controller that we just built based on the image. The very first step you're going to do before doing any other jobs, any other work, is you want to go ahead and upgrade all of the plugins that can be upgraded. Now, since this just started, I don't need to get new update information. That's fine. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, which this list is super long. So I'm going to grab the handle, go all the way to the bottom. I'm going to click on all and click on download now and install after restart. This will take a few moments, so I'll fast forward through this part. Okay, so now that all of the plugins have been downloaded, what we want to do is go ahead and do a restart. So we'll go ahead and click on Restart, and we'll flip back over to our console log and watch the restart, which takes 10 seconds from once you click the Restart checkbox. Now, as this controller is starting back up, we're going to watch the log. And you're probably going to see lots of error messages. That's okay. We're just going through this test process and we're writing down what we're doing. So we spun up the controller as it was, and now we're doing an upgrade in place of the Docker image. Now, we're still not on our real controller yet. This is still a dry run of what we would do on our real controller. And we can see here it's already telling us that Jenkins is fully up and running. I'll click on Jenkins. Let's see if it's truly up and running yet. And it is. Now, if I take a look at Manage Jenkins, what we're going to see once it renders is some plugins could not be loaded due to unsatisfied dependencies. Okay. In this case, the Windows Agents plugin, Jenkins 249.1 or higher is required. So in order for us to even enable these plugins, now we're at the point to where we need to upgrade our controller version from 235.5 to 319.1. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to open up my shell. I'm going to quit the container. So now I can see from a Docker PS perspective, nothing's running. But what we want to do now is we want to change the version of the image that we're running. And in this case, we're going to leave the line exactly the same, but we're changing our Jenkins controller to Jenkins/Jenkins : 2.319.1 JDK8, because remember, as we were going through our upgrade notes, we saw that the default version of Java that's running the controller actually has changed to 11. So in order to be able to access a Java 8 version, I need to specify -JDK8. But again, here's the key part. All the work that we just did, the plugins, the upgrade of the plugins, all live within this volume, this Jenkins_home volume, which is mapped to /var/Jenkins_home. So think about it for a moment. We had our volume right here, and we had our controller running here with the old version. It was changing everything inside the volume. Well, now we got rid of the controller. The volume is still good, but now we're going to put a new version of the controller pointing at this volume, effectively upgrading our base image for the Jenkins controller. In fact, it's not effectively, it is upgrading the Jenkins controller from, in our case, 235.5 to 319.1. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Let's watch what happens here. First off, since this image does not exist, it's going to pull it down. Once it's pulled down and it starts up, then we're going to watch the log as it goes through. Now let's watch this. What we can see here is that it started and now it's upgrading Jenkins, which we'll scroll back up here. It's upgrading Jenkins. The last version was 235.5. This is Jenkins 319.1. Now we're seeing some CSRF problems, and that's okay for right now because, again, we're just trying to see, okay, what does this look like when I'm doing the upgrade with all of the plugins that are on this controller. So we're waiting for this to finish up. And as it finishes up, what we're going to be able to see here is we'll click back on Jenkins, and we can see now that we are running 2.319.1. That's good. If we take a look at Manage Jenkins, we see lots of things we'll go back and take a look at in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and confirm that, yes, I'm truly running a JDK8 version. Now, it may not be the version that I want, but at least it's JDK8 and not JDK11. So I will click on System Information. I clicked on the wrong one to begin with. If I take a look at Java runtime version, it's 1.8.3.12, which 3.12 is probably where I want to go anyway because I'm running currently on my controller. I believe it was 2.8.2. Does anybody remember? Let's take a look. I am running actually 2.9.2. So if I'm seeing any issues or I'm wanting to dig in and do some other things, I'll write this down as like, okay, the test that I'm using right now is 3.12. Okay, still looking pretty good. Let's go back to our Manage Jenkins. So before we replaced the controller version from 235.5, which was our custom build, to 319.1, we had upgraded plugins. But I don't know if you caught this or not. Now there's other plugins that still need to be installed. So we did an upgrade of the plugins. We did a restart of 235.5 to make sure it started up at least okay to where we could load it up. We've now replaced 235 with 319. And now 319 is telling us, hey, you've got plugins to upgrade, which I'm going to do that right now. So let's go ahead and click on All and download now and install after restart. And in this case, again, this will take a few moments, so we'll fast forward through this. Okay, now that everything has been downloaded, we're going to go ahead and do another restart. So let's watch this restart. So we'll come back over to our shell. And again, fast forward. And now that we're back fully up and running, let's take a look at this controller. Again, loading up fine. Let's go to Manage Jenkins. First thing I'm going to look at is Manage Plugins and make sure that all the plugins are now taken care of, which they are. Manage Plugins, looks good, no updates available. We'll click back on Manage Jenkins. What we can see here is there are some plugins that are deprecated, so I would need to go through and figure out, okay, what am I going to do with that? Building on the built-in node can be a security issue. Again, that's fine, I understand that, but notice it said built-in and not master node. We'll see that again in a moment. Jenkins URL is empty. That's fine because we're not set up, again, with the unsecured and allows anyone. Again, this is completely isolated. This is not going to be long running. But notice here, the word master is being retired as the term for the main Jenkins process in the built-in node. Main process is now called controller, and the built-in node is just called built-in node. So how do I migrate it? Well, I have one button to push. We saw this in our upgrade notes. So we'll just say apply migration. And by clicking that, that has now changed. If you were to take a look at built-in executor status, it now says built-in node instead of it being master. So we're square on that one. That one's actually done. Then it's also telling us Java 11 is the recommended version. Notice we didn't get the 319 because we're now running 319. And then there are still 5 plugins here that we need to do something with, at least from a security perspective. For example, this plugin has credentials stored in plain text. This one's also plain text, a stored cross-site scripting vulnerability. So now I would have to go through and start figuring out, okay, what do I do with these plugins? Are they required? If they're not required, I'm going to uninstall them. Again, there's a lot more work to do, but at least from this point, I have successfully proven that I can take a 2.235.5 with its existing set of plugins and upgrade it to 2.319.1 and have all the plugins upgrade as they should, and everything still appears to be running okay. Now what do we do? You're thinking to yourself, okay, now I can just go ahead and go do all these steps that I just did on this standalone container image and I'm ready to go. Not really, but we're really, really close. Before you actually do that upgrade, especially if you're running directly on an instance that's being managed by a package manager such as RPM, think about it from my perspective of the upgrade notes. I'm running on CentOS, which means I probably need to add the Apple release package so I can get Daemonize. Or if I'm running on Debian, I don't have to worry about it. There's all these other little things that I need to make sure because I was just testing within Docker. But now, since I'm running Jenkins actually on an instance without Docker, I have to think about those things as well. But always, 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 step 0, back up your Jenkins home directory. But also, not just your Jenkins home directory. If you are running on an instance, you want to back up your WAR file. You want to back up either your sysconfig or your default file if you're on Debian. You want to back up your initd file. You want all of these files backed up and stored off on a different machine just in case, in that very case that you just don't want have to happen if you have to do a restore. You want all of those files safely stored off somewhere else. So in the case that you have to do a restore and do a rollback, you've got everything safe and ready to go if that scenario happens to you. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBees. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on that subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.